You are about to hear Insight by Earl Nightingale. Copyright 2019. Be Publishing online at beanpublishing.com.
This is Earl Nightingale for Insight. I received a letter from Douglas Stovall of Danville, Virginia, with a copy of a short piece entitled The Things You Learn After You Know It All. The piece was written by John W. Gardner, who, you may recall, was Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in the late 60s. He's also the author of the fine book, Self-Renewal. I found the piece excellent. See what you think of it. The Things You Learn After You Know It All. Would you bet on the future of this man? He's 53 years old. Most of his adult life has been a losing struggle against debt and misfortune. A war injury has denied him the use of his left hand. He's held several government jobs, succeeding at none, and he's often been in prison. Driven by heaven knows what motives, boredom, hope of gain, creative impulse, he determines to write a book. And the book turns out to be one that has enthralled the world for more than 350 years. For that former prisoner was Cervantes, and the book was Don Quixote. And the story poses a very interesting question. Why do some men and women discover new vitality and creativity to the end of their days, while others go to seed long before? We've all known people who run out of steam before they reach life's halfway mark. I'm not talking about those who fail to get to the top. We can't all get there. I'm talking about people who've stopped learning or growing because they've adopted the fixed attitudes and opinions that all too often come with the passing years. Most of us, in fact, progressively narrow the scope and variety of our lives. We succeed in our field of specialization, perhaps, and then become trapped in it. Nothing surprises us. We lose our sense of wonder. But if you're conscious of these dangers, you can resort to countervailing measures. Reject stagnation. Reject the myth that learning is for young people. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. Learn all your life, from your successes, from your failures. When you hit a spell of trouble, ask, what is it trying to teach me? The lessons aren't always happy ones. In one of his essays, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "Bad times have a scientific value. These are occasions a good learner wouldn't miss." Individuals who remain vital have learned not to be imprisoned by fixed habits, attitudes, and routines. We build our own prisons and serve as our own jailers. But if we build the prisons ourselves, we can tear them down ourselves. If we're willing to learn, the opportunities are everywhere. We learn from our work and from our friends and families. We learn by accepting the obligations of life, by suffering, by taking risks, by loving, by bearing life's indignities with dignity. The things you learn in maturity seldom involve information and skills. You learn to bear with the things you can't change. You learn to avoid self-pity. You learn not to burn up energy and anxiety. You learn that most people are neither for you nor against you, but rather are thinking about themselves. You learn that no matter how much you try to please, some people are never going to love you, a notion that troubles at first, but is eventually relaxing. Among your obligations is an appointment with yourself. Self-knowledge, the beginning of wisdom, is ruled out for most people by the increasingly effective self-deception they practice as they grow older. By middle age, most of us are accomplished fugitives from ourselves, yet there's a surprising usefulness in learning not to lie to yourself. One of the most valuable things you learn is that ultimately you're the one who's responsible for you. You don't blame others, you don't blame circumstances, you take charge. If you're going to keep on learning, your surest allies will be high motivation and enthusiasm. Some people, somehow, keep their zest until the day they die. They care about things. They reach out. They enjoy. They risk. And above all, perhaps, they know how important it is to have meaning in their lives. People can achieve meaning only if they've made a commitment to something larger than their own little egos. whether to loved ones, to fellow humans, to work, or to some moral or religious concept. Bernard Shaw once wrote, "This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, instead of being a feverish, selfish little clod, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." Many of us equate commitment with certain lines of work, teaching, nursing, the ministry. We feel that in such caring occupations one will somehow find a personal nobility greater than is possible to a steelworker, say, or an umbrella salesman. But doing any legitimate job as well as one can is in itself an admirable commitment. People who strive for such excellence, whether they're driving a truck or running a country store or bringing up a family, make the world better by just being the kind of people they are. They've learned life's most valuable lesson. An organization of any sort, from the family to the supermarket to the beauty salon to the largest multinational corporation, is a reflection of its leadership. What is a leader? What constitutes an unusually good or great leader? While writing in the publication International Management, John Adair shares his thoughts on the special talents that set a leader apart. John Adair is a professor of leadership at Surrey University in England and a former leadership instructor at the British Military Academy, Sandhurst, as well as author of several books on leadership. He writes, "Shortly after joining Chrysler Corporation, Lee Iacocca stumbled across a stunning revelation, which he writes about in his new book, Iacocca, an Autobiography." He says, "Chrysler was like Italy in the 1860s. The company consisted of a cluster of little duchies, each one run by a prima donna. It was a bunch of mini-empires with nobody giving a damn about what anyone else was doing." Iacocca knew that he had to start immediately to build a team approach at every level. This was a key point in his outstanding leadership style. Few leaders have the talent of an Iacocca. Few leaders do more than merely coordinate efforts. But the most effective leaders create a sense of esprit de corps, a team spirit that makes even the most arduous and the most humdrum work exciting. Well, the gist of the piece is that the unusual or great leader has great organizational talents, and he also has the ability to inspire others to much greater effort than they would have expended had they been left to their own devices. Both are needed in any true definition of leadership. Adair goes on to say, Abraham Zelznick, a professor at the Harvard Business School, has been attempting to sort things out. Leaders, he says, are often dramatic and unpredictable in style. They tend to create a climate of change, sometimes not unlike chaos. They're often obsessed by their ideas, which appear visionary and consequently excite, stimulate, and drive other people to work hard and create reality out of fantasy. And he considers Lee Iacocca such a leader also. Managers, Zelznick continues, are typically hardworking, analytical, tolerant, and fair-minded. They take much pride in perpetuating and improving upon the status quo, stemming from their strong sense of belonging to the organization. Such executives concentrate on process, whereas leaders focus on substance. Professor Zelznick, then, seems to think that you're either a leader or a manager, but that is an oversimplification that obscures the truth. The best chief executives are both. You can assess your leadership qualities simply by looking at the success of anything you're in charge of. But it's very true. Every organization, from the smallest to the largest, is a reflection of its leadership, and maintaining a high order of truly excellent leadership is one of the toughest jobs in business. Emerson wrote, "There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself, for better or worse, as his portion, and that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through the toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given him to till. The power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he's tried. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. There is a bit of advice that a person would do well to reflect upon every morning of his life. No one can even estimate the number of people who live nervous, anxious, unhappy lives because they daily attempt the impossible, which is to be like someone else. There are people who don't realize the truth of Emerson's words that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide. He must have used the word suicide because we have to kill that which is natural in ourselves when we attempt to be like someone else. They need to recognize the truth, also, that the power that resides in them is new in nature, that it has never appeared before in just that way on earth, that if they'll learn about and develop their own powers, they'll have no need of envy or imitation. Envy is ignorance because it means a person is ignorant of his own powers and abilities, his one-of-a-kind natural talent. He's never looked within himself for his own road to greatness, but instead seeks it in the lives of others. And when he fails to succeed, as do those he envies, as fail he must because he can't possibly be exactly like them, his image of himself shrinks. Not understanding that he is unlike those he envies, he doesn't realize that this simple fact lies at the bottom of his failure. Nor does he understand that he can be as successful as anyone on earth if he will build upon that power that resides in him. As Emerson put it, the power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he's tried. This is why a parent is off base when he says to a child, "Why aren't you like so-and-so, like a brother or some model child? Look what he's doing." The parent doesn't understand that it's a human impossibility for the child to be like so-and-so and to do what he does in the same way. Instead, a parent would be wise to say, "Don't worry about so-and-so. He's found his strength, and he's building on it. You have a strength of your own, and when you find it, you can build just as high." And then those great words, "Trust thyself." Every heart vibrates to that iron string. When a person finds himself, when he stops imitating and envying others, there's something in his nature that says to him, "This is it. You've found your road at last." Success isn't due to luck or the breaks or anything else in circumstances or environment. Real success is a matter of finding yourself and building upon what you find, just as of those whom so many envy. Every person is born to be a star at something. The purpose of his or her life is to discover it, and then to spend his or her years building upon that plot of ground it was given to him and to her to till. Just as the best racehorses are given the greatest weight to carry as a handicap, there's a penalty for being successful in business. The French have a term for it, la déformation professionnelle. It translates into the professional deformation, and it refers to a kind of short-sightedness, even blindness, suffered by those in business concerning ways to steadily improve on what they're doing. In short, after we succeed in a particular business, we tend then to take it for granted, and worse, we tend to see it as a kind of fixed entity, finished, complete, good enough. It often takes a person from outside the business to see yawning opportunities for further growth, opportunities that the business person, busy doing things as he's done them in the past, fails to see. That's why good consultants can be of real value. Some years ago, I conducted a class in creative thinking. It was an evening class held once a week and made up largely of business people. One of our most successful devices was to have each week a business person tell about a problem he was having. It was astonishing to see on the following week the marvelous solutions to his problem that would be proposed by people with no experience in his particular line of business. Quite often a solution they had found to a similar problem would fit his with a little modification. It was especially rewarding when the class was able to help solve a recurring problem rather than one that had just popped up. People inside a particular line of business or industry tend to see their business or industry in a particular way, while outsiders look at it in a wholly different way, and by doing so, see all sorts of things that the others might miss. There's an old joke about two businessmen who had been taking the same train into New York City for 20 years. One morning, one of them said to his friend, "You know, we've been riding this train now for 20 years. Every morning, I ask you how your business is doing. But not once in 20 years have you ever asked me how my business is doing." "Oh, really?" the other one said. "I didn't realize that. Okay, so how's business?" And his friend said, "You shouldn't ask." Actually, if business is bad, spending an hour chatting about it with a friend might uncover a solution to a problem. I'm not saying that you should carp or complain about business, but look at problems as a part of the business process. Executives are paid more than rank-and-file workers because they're supposed to be able to solve problems or avoid them through proper planning. We should discuss problems with an attitude that indicates we fully expect to solve them, that they're challenges to be overcome. Incidentally, the family can often come up with marvelous solutions to business problems. The worst thing we can do is keep our problems inside and let them fester. Keep in mind that our being in the business can often cause us to develop an uncreative mindset, la déformation professionnelle, as the French say. It's like the story about the trucker who became stuck under an overpass because his load was a bit too high. He was going to start unloading the truck when a kid on a bicycle said, "Why don't you just let some air out of the tires?" The Bushmen who live in the Kalahari Desert of southwest Africa have no possessions. And since there is nothing in the world that is not free and accessible to all of them, they desire no possessions. Living in a hot climate, they need few garments readily obtained from the skins of the occasional animals they kill for food, and nomadic in nature, they have no dwelling places, but at night simply sleep around the fire on the sand. How different from the world in which we live. Our lives are cluttered from attic to basement with things, hundreds upon hundreds of things, little things, big things, and sometimes it seems that we don't own the things in our lives, but rather they own us. Okay, besides the things we already have, and we don't really realize until we move from one place to another how many we do have and how unnecessary most of them are, what else do you want? Have you ever made out a want list? If you'll seriously set about it, you'll probably be surprised by how little you really want. You'll also realize that what you put on your want list is well within your reach over the coming years. You might want to try writing out a want list. Such a list has a way of bringing order into our lives. Of course, you can't list every little thing you'll want for the rest of your life. Those things come along as a part of living. But I mean the big important things. What do you want that you don't now have? Someone once said that the American people can have anything they want. The trouble is they don't know what they want. With such an abundance of everything, we're often like children standing in front of a mile-long candy counter or a person looking at a really good restaurant menu. How do you make a selection from such abundance? If you decide on one thing, you're passing up all those other things. As a result, many people choose impulsively. Often, too, by getting too many little things, they dissipate their means, and thus they're unable to obtain larger, more important things. So it's wise to spend some time thinking about just exactly what we will want from the years ahead of us. Such a want list doesn't have to be limited to tangibles, by the way. List the intangibles, too. What will comfort and enrich us on snowy or rainy days? What will cause us to get up in the morning with interest and enthusiasm in our later years? And to what do we wish to commit ourselves for at least a part of our days that's big enough and interesting enough to keep us happily occupied for the rest of our lives? And certainly, we'll list those wonderful things we want to have just because they're wonderful to have and enjoy. They're fun. Our toys, you might say, or collector's items. A want list is not an easy thing to work out. It takes time and a lot of good, hard, deep thought. But try it. Go to work on your want list. You may want to do it very privately, sitting on a beach somewhere or on a park bench. But it is a very good idea. I had lunch with some friends the other day, and one of them told a rather interesting story. It seems there was a great flood. It was probably this last spring. One man with his house half full of water was offered a ride to higher ground by a passing boater. "No thanks," he said. "I have faith that the Lord will protect me." And as the water rose higher, he continued to pray to be saved. Soon he was on the roof, with the floodwaters still rising. Another boater came along and offered to take him to safety. "No thanks," he said. "The Lord will save me." Before long, he was standing on the ridge of the roof, the water up to his neck, when a rescue helicopter hovered overhead and dropped him a rope with a rescue strap. Again he refused, and the helicopter pilot went on about his rescue mission. Soon the floodwaters swept the man from his perch, and he was drowned. In heaven he came into the presence of the Lord and told the Lord of his disappointment that he had not answered his desperate prayers. "But I tried," said the Lord. "I sent 2 boats and a helicopter." Well, we chuckled at the story, but it reminded us that we often don't see or appreciate help when we're surrounded by it. Have you ever heard someone, usually one very young, say, "I don't need anybody, I'll go it alone"? I seem to remember saying the same thing myself when I had more ambition than good sense. Even Robinson Crusoe, when he landed on his island, had a good store of knowledge accumulated from books and his contact with others, and it saved his life. As one expert put it, we think, and we often say, that a new idea or insight is the product of a single human brain. In one sense it is, but all our creativity today is not a product of an isolated human brain, but of one conditioned by interaction with other humans and by the history of civilization. What kind of progress could we make in the new thoughts and ideas with which we deal today if mankind had not left us the legacy of language, of numbers, of symbolic thinking in general? Ralph W. Gerard tells of a meeting in Berlin between a great English physiologist and a great German physiologist, both eventual Nobel Prize winners. The German, Otto H. Warburg, was working on the enzymes in cells that make it possible for them to use oxygen and give off carbon dioxide.
You are about
That a new idea or insight is the product of a single human brain. In one sense it is, but all our creativity today is not a product of an isolated human brain, but of one conditioned by interaction with other humans and by the history of civilization. What kind of progress could we make in the new thoughts and ideas with which we deal today if mankind had not left us the legacy of language, of numbers, of symbolic thinking in general? Ralph W. Gerard tells of a meeting in Berlin between a great English physiologist and a great German physiologist, both eventual Nobel Prize winners. The German, Otto H. Warburg, was working on the enzymes in cells that make it possible for them to use oxygen and give off carbon dioxide and so get the energy to support their activity. He almost had the respiratory enzyme, as it has come to be called, but he had not quite been able to pin it down chemically. The Englishman, Archibald V. Hill, mentioned an observation just reported at the Physiological Society in England, that light can break up a combination of hemoglobin and carbon monoxide. This gave the clue. Warburg spent that night in the laboratory blocking the respiration of yeast in the presence of carbon monoxide and restoring it by strong illumination. The next morning, he sent off the paper that brought him a Nobel Prize. His insight and idea were clearly sparked by the communication from another mind. He made an important discovery and deserved his prize, but he probably could not have accomplished it by himself. The point is that you just can't go it alone, and that it's a good idea to develop a sense of the brotherhood of man. As John Donne so beautifully put it, no man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And if a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. We need and must depend upon each other to survive and prosper, and since this is true, it should engender in each of us a sense of gratitude to our fellows. It was a Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1927. The place was Shibe Park, Philadelphia. There were 35,000 excited baseball fans in the stands, all booing one man. Bob Lefty Grove, who was probably one of the greatest left-handed pitchers of all time, had just struck Babe Ruth out on 3 pitched balls for the second successive time, and 2 runners were left stranded on base. As the great slugger returned to the bench amidst the wild and abusive jeering, he looked up into the stands with an unruffled smile, just as he had the first time he struck out, gave his cap a polite little tip, stepped down into the dugout, and calmly took his drink of water. In the 8th inning, his turn came up again. This time the situation was critical. The Athletics were leading the Yankees 3-1. The bases were loaded, and there were 2 out. It was up to the great Babe Ruth to win the game or lose it. As he selected his favorite bat and started toward the plate, the crowd rose in a body, as if by signal. The excitement was tremendous. The crowd wanted Babe Ruth to strike out again. Lefty Grove rifled the first blazing fastball over the plate. Ruth swung and missed. The next pitch was good, and Ruth swung so hard and missed that he staggered and fell down. There was a cloud of dust as the big guy sprawled on the ground, and the crowd was going mad. The Babe got to his feet, brushed the dust off his trousers, and got set for the next pitch. Grove delivered the ball so fast, few of the fans even saw it. Babe swung again, but this time there was a crack like a rifle shot. The ball soared high and far. It cleared the scoreboard and the houses across the street, one of the longest hits ever made in baseball history. As Babe Ruth trotted around the bases and across the plate behind the other runners with what proved to be the winning runs, he received a wild ovation from the crowd, the same crowd that had been booing him all afternoon. Babe looked up into the stands, doffed his cap with that same little smile, and the expression on his face was exactly like the ones he wore on his first 2 trips, when he had taken the razzing. Later in the season, after the Yankees had clinched the pennant, an interviewer asked Ruth, "Babe, what do you do when you get in a batting slump?" And Babe answered, "I just keep going up there and keep swinging at 'em. I know the old law of averages will hold good for me the same as it does for anybody else, if I keep having my healthy swings. If I strike out 2 or 3 times in a game or fail to get a hit for a week, why should I worry? Let the pitchers worry. They're the guys who are going to suffer later on." Babe Ruth's unshakable faith in making the law of averages work for him enabled him to accept his bad breaks and failures with a smile. This simple, common-sense philosophy had much to do with making him baseball's greatest showman, biggest box-office attraction, and the highest-paid ball player in his time. He had his faults, like the rest of us, but his faith in the law of averages made him great. There's a lesson there, I think, for all of us. Babe Ruth hit 714 home runs. He struck out 1,330 times. But we don't think about his failures, do we? And neither did he. He kept swinging, and knew the law of averages would take care of the rest. How about you? This is Earl Nightingale with Insight. I've subscribed to Forbes magazine for many years, and in the back of the magazine, as you may know, there's a page titled Thoughts on the Business of Life. I always read it for the excellent quotations it carries, like this one by B.C. Forbes. "It's when things go hardest, when life becomes most trying, that there is greatest need for having a fixed goal, for having an air castle that the outside world cannot wreck. When few comforts come from without, it's all the more necessary to have a fount to draw from within, and the man or woman who has a star toward which to press cannot be thrown off the course, no matter how the world may try, no matter how far things may seem to be wrong. You know, that's one of the most important reasons for having a long-range goal, the big goal toward which you're working. I say one of the most important reasons because the most important is the fact that you will in all likelihood reach the goal. The trouble with people is not in reaching their serious goals, it's in establishing them. But having a worthwhile goal gives you a reason for picking yourself back up and heading off again. It gives you some place to go. It gives you a reason for getting up in the mornings, especially on those cold, gray, rainy, or snowy mornings when you have to mumble to yourself over and over, "Stay with it. Stay with it." That's when a star toward which to press looks bright and beckoning out there in the murk of the morning, and pretty soon, well, you're on your way again. Later, when things are fine again, you wonder how you could have ever felt so low or even considered giving up for a moment. Without a goal out there somewhere, it would be a simple matter to become an automaton, a cipher, an empty, doll-like figure simply going through the motions, getting up, moving through the day, and going to bed again. Having a goal is why some of the unlikeliest-seeming people who seem to us to have nothing whatever to bring happiness into their lives, are often the most cheerful people we'll see all day. You can bet that there's a goal there, something held in the heart and seen only in the mind toward which they're moving, something that makes it all wonderful for them. In fact, that's the very definition of happiness. We're happiest when we're moving towards something we want to bring about. The secret is in the two words, moving toward. I remember reading in the book Papillon that incredible tale of multiple escapes from the French penal colony in French Guiana, that no matter what the hardships were, or how wretched the escapees' lives, they were filled with joy as long as they were moving toward freedom. Pain, suffering, starvation, exhaustion, constant danger were all worth bearing as long as they were moving toward freedom. And this is why we need to reaffirm our goals on a regular basis, why we need to make sure we know what it is we're moving toward. It's when things go hardest, when life becomes most trying, that there is greatest need for having a fixed goal, for having an air castle that the outside world cannot wreck, and the man or woman who has a star toward which to press cannot be thrown off the course. It's believed that the most common failing of human beings is a lack of self-confidence. We tend to remember our failures and forget our successes. To become healthier and get rid of self-doubt, we have to turn this around. Dr. Maxwell Maltz, in his book Psycho-Cybernetics, wrote that confidence is built upon an experience of success. When we first begin any undertaking, we're likely to have very little confidence, because we haven't learned from experience that we can succeed. This is true of learning to ride a bicycle, speak in public, or perform surgery. It's literally true that success breeds success. Even a small success can be used as a stepping stone to a greater one. We need to form the habit of remembering past successes and forgetting the failures. This is the way both an electronic computer and the human brain are supposed to operate. Practice improves skill and success. In basketball, golf, horseshoe pitching, or selling, not because repetition has any value in itself. If it did, we would learn our errors instead of our hits. A person learning to pitch horseshoes, for example, will miss the stake many more times than he'll hit it. If mere repetition were the answer to improved skill, his practice should make him more expert at missing, since that's what he's practiced most. However, although his misses may outnumber hits 10 to 1, through practice, his misses gradually diminish, and his hits come more and more frequently. This is because the computer in his brain remembers and reinforces his successful attempts and forgets the misses. This is the way that both an electronic computer and our own success mechanisms learn to succeed. Yet what do most of us do? We destroy our self-confidence by remembering past failures and forgetting all about past successes. We not only remember failures, we impress them on our minds with emotion. We condemn ourselves. We flay ourselves with shame and remorse, both of which are highly egotistical, self-centered emotions. And self-confidence disappears. So the prescription is to use errors and mistakes as a way to learning, then dismiss them from your mind. Deliberately remember and picture to yourself past successes. Everyone has succeeded sometime at something, especially when beginning a new task. Call up the feelings you experienced in some past success, however small it might have been. Dr. Winfred Overholser, superintendent of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, has said that recalling brave moments is a very sound way to restore belief in yourself. That too many people are prone to let one or two failures blot out all good memories. If we will systematically relive our brave moments in memory, he says, we'll be surprised to see we had more courage than we thought. Dr. Overholser recommends the practice of vividly remembering our past successes and brave moments as an invaluable aid whenever self-confidence is shaken. So there you are, the prescription for getting rid of feelings of self-doubt, the lack of self-confidence. Forget your mistakes, just as you should forget the bad shots you've made on the golf course, and remember your successes. This is the normal, the healthy way to live positively and effectively. A person who lacks confidence in himself is a person who has never really tested his powers. A test, to be valid, must include a whole lot more than one or two tries. Dr. Kenneth Hildebrand, for many years a Midwestern minister and author of the book Achieving Real Happiness, told of a woman who was married to a cruel, shiftless alcoholic. When drunk, he would beat her and the children. Debts accumulated. Often there was no food in the house. When the eldest child was 7, the husband deserted his wife. She had no money, no credit, no business training. She had to undergo surgery, thus adding to her mountain of debt. A few months later, the youngest child became ill and died. When the father received the news by wire, he telegraphed in reply, "Terrible shock. Sorry to hear the news." His heartlessness so angered the woman that she resolved to rear the children without him at whatever cost to herself. The following 9 years she toiled at any work available. She never lost her determination or her sense of humor, and she prided herself in not saying or doing anything to turn the children against their father. She managed to keep the home together and to make it a cheery one. At the end of 9 years, she married a man who loved her and the children devotedly. To encourage other women undergoing difficult experiences, she said, "Any woman can wring happiness out of life if she's worthy of happiness." Her words are worth remembering. Her happiness and well-being did not depend upon circumstances. She was superior to them. She rose above them. No woman would enjoy going through what this woman had to endure, and every life has its problems. But if we permit our circumstances to dictate how we feel and act, we're relinquishing control of our own lives. And it's our attitude toward others and the world that determines what happens to us. If the woman I mentioned had not developed her cheerful, friendly, successful attitude toward her life, the chances are excellent that she never would have found the right man and married again. A popular fallacy held by almost all young people and a large segment of the older adults is that happiness hinges on pleasant circumstances and congenial surroundings. These people think that if their circumstances were better, they'd be happy. This isn't true. If a person cannot find happiness in his daily life now, unless he wakes up, he will never be happy, regardless of his circumstances. The fact is, whether or not we admit it to ourselves, that genuine happiness is hidden in the quiet simplicities and fundamental virtues of life. These cannot be purchased, even though you could afford to pay a king's ransom, and they at the same time exist for anyone. Every day of our lives is either successful or unsuccessful. If we permit the success of our days to depend upon things such as the weather, the talk and the actions of other people, and if we concentrate not on what we have, but rather on those things we do not have, well, we become little more than small mirrors of our surroundings. What we should remember is that each of us, in reality, shapes his world in his own likeness. If ours is not a happy world, it's because that's the way we see it. Henry David Thoreau wrote, "I'm convinced from experience that to maintain oneself on this earth is not a hardship, but a pastime, if we will live simply and wisely. Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only dispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. The job of the good social critic, and we need social critics, is to see beyond the obvious to the supporting layers below. My old friend, newspaper columnist Sidney J. Harris, did that as well as anyone. He once had a column on sons and daughters in which he wrote, "Many, if not most, parents, as their children go through high school and into college, become terribly competitive on their children's behalf. They'll tell you at dinner parties that this child got into such and such a college, that this one is working on a master's, that another is making a certain team or winning a scholarship. Some of these, of course, are legitimate things for parents to be proud of. But there's all this emphasis on doing and so little about being. What is the child like who's getting into this school and making these grades and receiving these honors? As a person, as a family member, as a human being, not as an achievement machine reflecting on the parent's greater glory." He went on to write, "A child should not be a surrogate for a parent's own frustrated wishes or a substitute for worldly disappointments and vexations. What a youngster is, how he or she relates to family and friends and the world at large, is a permanent index of character and worth. And this is what we should be grateful for when we see it in our children, more than all the outward marks of success in the classroom or the stadium. And this is the way they want us to regard them, as persons, not as producers, promoters, performers, or parental ornaments." So wrote Sidney J. Harris. What is the child like? As a person, as a family member, as a human being? Those are the factors that really count in the long run. Is the child kind, thoughtful, considerate, loving? How does he relate to you and to others, to other children? Some of the most wonderful children are not at the head of their class, but they're children who will grow up to be achievers in their own way and who will become fine parents in their turn. We've all heard parents boasting of their children's winning scholarships or getting into such and such university, and I think we're all tempted to ask, what kind of a kid is he or she? I remember a doctor I knew briefly many years ago. He had come to our relatively small community as an assistant to a doctor we all liked very much and who was cruelly overworked. He had been selected because of his phenomenal grades in medical school. He had been an honor student all his life. It took us only a month or so to realize we didn't want him, and we refused to see him. He was a cold, unfeeling machine. He had the personality of a estuarine crocodile. And he was money-centered. He was in it for the money, and it didn't take long for everyone to realize it. For all his brilliance and scholarship, he was a failure as a doctor, as a human being. He should have been working in a lab in a pharmaceutical house someplace if they could put up with him. He left a short time later. I'm sure his parents were proud of him and boasted of his scholastic achievements. It isn't what we achieve, it isn't what we have that causes us to become a success. It's what we become along the way. And it starts in our childhood, of course. In their book, Type A Behavior in Your Heart, Drs. Meyer Friedman and Ray H. Rosenman talk about two kinds of personalities, the Type A and the Type B. Type A is the one who's prone to the heart attack. He's the hard-driving type. He often moves up faster in an organization than a Type B does, but he usually dies before he can really enjoy his hectic success. He's highly demanding, easy to anger, rushing from one place to another, highly visible, drives like a demon. You know the type. Incidentally, when I say he, I don't mean to indicate that these types are restricted to men. They're not at all. As many women are affected as men. Type B, on the other hand, is a more passive type. He rolls with the punches, has a better sense of humor, mixes better with people, likes people better. He's a hard worker and conscientious, but he's not in a hurry all the time. He intends to enjoy the trip as much as the destination, and while he may move up more slowly in an organization, he'll probably last longer and live to enjoy his well-earned retirement years. What if someone is an A? How can he become a B? He can still reach his goals, enjoy the trip a whole lot more, and live to be old and in excellent health. Well, here are 7 things someone can do to become a B person. 1. Do one thing at a time. Stop right now, today, trying to do more than one thing well at a time. 2. Listen without interrupting. No matter how much it hurts, learn to listen to what the other person is saying until he finishes what he wants to say and has a right to say. 3. Read books that demand concentration. Read The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky or Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago or books by someone such as Saul Bellow. 4. Eat leisurely. Savor your food. Find out what food really tastes like. Enjoy it for a change. Take smaller bites and savor them. Put your knife and fork down on the table between bites instead of having the next bite ready and waiting to be wolfed down. 5. Have a retreat where you can be alone. Sometimes that's tough, but it's important. 6. Avoid people and events that irritate you. I can hear some rather interesting comments and see a few rueful smiles on that one. Don't go to parties if you don't like them. Don't see people you don't like. 7. Plan a loafing period every day, a time when you can perhaps stretch out and relax. Read a good book or take a short nap. And my old friend Chris Haggerty adds one more to that list. Drive within the speed limit. Find out what it's like to arrive calm and collected, rested, and at peace with the world. If you're in such a hurry to get there, leave earlier and drive within the speed limit. It's wonderful for the nerves, and statistics prove it'll help you live longer. 8 ways, then, for an A to become a B. Don't be an A. Stress kills. Slow down. Decide what you want to do, where you want to go, and relax in the calm certainty that you'll arrive at your goal in good time, with good health, and serenity to boot. I received a letter from one A. Robertson, informing me that I had been appointed to an honorary position of some prominence in the community. Since it had included a framed certificate suitable for hanging and was unquestionably a bona fide honor, I wanted to thank the person sending it. But there was no indication on the letterhead or in the letter as to whether the sender was a man or a woman. Just A. Robertson, Executive Director. Now, a director can be male or female, no hint there. How would you address the person in a letter? I suppose you could call to find out, but when you write a letter to someone, I don't think that you should first have to institute an investigation to determine the person's sex. There's no time for that sort of thing. When a letter's turn to be answered comes up, you should be able to answer it on the instanter. Don't you agree? Now, he or she wrote to me as Mr. Earl Nightingale. But Earl is a dead giveaway. Nobody in his right mind is going to name a girl Earl. But what do you do with an initial? No matter what it is, the letter writer's sex is still in question. And you just can't start a letter, especially one in which you're thanking someone. Dear Robertson. Well, do you know what I did? I addressed the letter, Dear Person Robertson. Now, I know it's a person, and after all, person is about the highest designation possible on this earth. We're all persons first, and then whatever else we happen to be second, third, and so on. And person makes no sexual designation. It doesn't withhold sex, nor imply its withholding. It's a good, rich, sound, full word. Person. And as I wrote the thank you note for the honor bestowed upon me, I was aware that I was writing the letter in a slightly different way than I would have if I'd known for sure the sex of the person. I was writing the letter in a third way, not as I would if writing to a woman, not as I would if writing to a man, but different from both, and for some inexplicable reason, better than either. Addressing myself to a person, it seemed as though I were writing to someone of slightly higher rank. Interesting, isn't it? And I fell to thinking that that's what our kids are trying to tell us as they work their way through the difficult years. Look, I'm more than just another boy or girl. I'm a person. And our husbands and wives are trying to tell us the same thing. We tend to forget how wonderful and complex, how fraught with potential, a boy or a girl or a man or a woman truly is, if indeed we ever knew or thought much about it. Research is constantly uncovering what amazing, virtually limitless creatures we are. When writing a letter to a person, you're writing to the greatest creature the earth has produced. I was aware of that as I wrote the letter. Now, that isn't to say that we always act up to our true stature, nor that most of us are even aware of our true worth, but it's there all the same. So I'm going to send a copy of this issue of Insight to the person who wrote me that nice, complimentary letter. He or she may get a charge out of it. I meant no offense. After all, he or she is a person. I've often thought how nice it would be to be the maker of a product such as Oreo cookies. Oreos have been around for nearly 100 years, and just about everybody loves them. What a beautiful product. Just sit back, relax, and watch as the profits... Ooh, there. No matter what your product is, you can't ever just sit back and relax. The other day, I was in the grocery store, and I saw packages of Oreo cookies that had been dipped into and were now temptingly covered with fudge. To Nabisco, it apparently wasn't good enough that it had one of the most wonderful cookies on earth. It was now offering Oreos dipped in fudge. And the fudge-covered Oreos didn't affect the original Oreo cookie shelf space. They had their own shelf space in the store. I had dinner one time with the man who invented the pop-top aluminum can opener, the one that stays fastened to the can. His name is J. Morton, and he receives a royalty on every one of those openers produced. But he's not sitting back. In fact, he wrote the Superman movies. Can you imagine one person producing two products so unrelated, so different? Jay's wife, Lucy, owns and operates one of the most beautiful designer furniture showrooms in the world in Miami, Florida. Lucy's an interior designer who knows her business. I chatted with her on the telephone today, and she told me she's thinking of opening another showroom in Beverly Hills. If she does, it'll be a big winner. And I hope she does. We'll see more of her, for one thing. She's a beautiful, brilliant woman. Oreo cookies dipped in fudge. A revolutionary can opener. The Superman motion pictures. And magnificent furniture showrooms in Miami and Beverly Hills. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world do all these disparate ideas, successful as they are, and believe me, they are, have to do with me? Imagination, my friend. Just more proof that, as Henry Miller once put it, imagination is everything. How are you doing in the imagination department? Can your product be dipped in fudge? What exciting ideas have you come up with during the past year? Care to write them down? How much are they worth, would you guess? If even the Oreo cookie can be improved upon, something most of us thought could never be done, it means anything can be improved upon. Is your package as simple to open as a can of whatever you want to drink? Can you imagine a writer of motion pictures inventing that can opener? Why not? It's true. Imagination is everything. And we're the only creatures on the planet, as far as we know, with the power of imagining. Imagination brings excitement, possibilities, adventure, love, fun, and good food into our lives. Imagination is the scout that leads the way and motivates us to try, to give it the best that's in us. When we lose the capacity for imagination, we lose everything else. The problem seems to be that a sizable segment of the population uses its imagination in a negative way. These people seem to be driven by necessity more than they are by fun and enjoyment. Perhaps it's the result of generations of eking out a subsistence. And if our imagination, our thinking is limited, barren, or bleak, that's the way it's going to be. After all, we're the ones who send out that scout. It's our imagination that's setting the stage for us. If we're held in some kind of limited prison, it's our imagination that's done it. It's our doing, and let's never forget it. Changing that mindset is so important and often so difficult. Maybe we need a little vacation once in a while, a bit of rest to stop and consider how things are going. Maybe it's time to dip the cookie into fudge or come up with a new can opener. After all, There's a Superman in each one of us. And we need to do some possibility thinking. Maybe we need to see a showroom like Lucy's. In fact, you might want to drop by there. It's called Lux, L-U-X-E, and it's at 45 Northeast 39th Street in Miami. When you look at the kind of furnishings Lucy has in that store, you begin to start thinking in terms of possibilities. It's a labor of love for Lucy. After all, her husband invented that opener and wrote the Superman movies. I wonder what Jay's doing these days. I suggest that you begin sitting for a few quiet minutes every day. Early in the morning's best for me, all by yourself perhaps, and let your imagination do a bit of scouting. You can come up with ideas too, you know. Ways to improve the things you're presently working with, ideas that can revolutionize your life. Keep this thought in mind. Imagination is everything. That's everything, not to be confused with some things. Imagination is everything. We tend to do that which we imagine ourselves doing. We can become only what we think about. Oh, and I learned something else about cookies. If the cookies are broken, you can eat them with impunity. It seems that when a cookie is broken, all the calories leak out. Some time back, I was playing golf with a couple of friends from what we like to call the old days in radio. Incidentally, the old days in anything are the days when you were first starting in something. They've nothing whatever to do with the beginning of an industry or an art form. In the course of our conversation, mention was made of someone who, as the speaker put it, had decided to rest on his laurels, decided to try to play it safe, and I got to thinking that most people who rest on their laurels are singularly short of laurels upon which to rest. Now, this is not always true, of course. The athlete who decides to retire while still champion, or the person who reaches the age of quietly sitting back and handing the reins of activity to others, is often respected and admired for his decision. But generally speaking, those who collect the most laurels, that is, those who do the most and are quite naturally rewarded for what they do, are the least likely to rest upon what they've done. And conversely, it often seems that those who have done and are doing the least, those who have the fewest laurels, do the most sitting on them. They are the very ones who seem to be taking it easy. We're creatures of habit, and those men and women who early form the habit of keeping busy by developing many interests or throwing themselves into a consuming interest of some kind tend to remain busy people for the rest of their lives. They don't pay too much attention to the laurels they amass, but rather keep moving on ahead of them. I remember seeing a cartoon depicting the great Leonardo da Vinci at his workbench working on a model of some kind of helicopter. All about the room are strewn the amazing collection of things turned out by this revolving genius, and some character is standing in the middle of the room saying, "What I mean is, Leonardo, aren't you spreading yourself too thin?" Well, it was a very funny cartoon. There was no way for a man such as Leonardo to spread himself too thin. There were no thin places in his genius. Emerson had something to say on this. He said, "As long as your genius buys, the investment is safe, though you spend like a monarch." Yes, it's a paradox of man and the world that those with the most laurels do the least resting. Those with the least do the most. I remember hearing Billy Casper, one of the world's all-time great golfers, say, "I find that the more I practice, the luckier I get." He said that after just winning the U.S. Open and then successfully defending his Western Open title in Chicago. He was far too busy winning new laurels to rest on the big pile of old ones. Getting back to our golf game discussion about the man who had decided to rest on his laurels, his value as a performer to his employer and himself began to diminish the moment he switched from being opportunity-directed to becoming security-directed. Chesterfield said, "Idleness is only the refuge of weak minds and the holiday of fools." And Carlyle said, "In idleness there is perpetual despair." It's all right to rest on one's laurels, but never more than a week or so. This is Earl Nightingale with Insight. I received a most interesting letter from an Insight subscriber. He's a dentist, a periodontist, actually, in New England. And he writes, Dear Earl, I've been listening to your audio cassette programs over the years, and I want to compliment you on your dedication to quality. Your Lead the Field program is one of my favorites. I've recommended it to numerous friends and colleagues and have given copies as presents to various people. I wanted to tell you how one of the messages in Lead the Field, titled Acres of Diamonds, has profoundly influenced my life. I think you'll find the story interesting. I'm a periodontist. About 3 years ago, unfortunately, a disc in my back ruptured, and I lost several months of work. During my recuperation, I walked long distances every day, and when I walk, I'm able to do some creative thinking. I had listened to Acres of Diamonds many, many times, and was constantly aware of a certain passage in which you discuss the fact that one can find the opportunity one's always wanted in the field of endeavor one is presently working in. He goes on to write, in the tape you said that this opportunity would not be obvious, but would be hidden in common everyday garments, just as was the hairpin with which someone fashioned the first paperclip, or the dirty drinking glass which triggered the paper cup industry. I must have listened to that passage several hundred times, and I knew somewhere in my practice that opportunity was lying dormant. Then one day, while I was on one of my walks, it hit me. I got the idea of developing a plastic, disposable, color-coded periodontal probe to replace the standard but archaic metal probe long used by dentists throughout the world. It took a little time for the idea to gel, but after meeting with many plastics engineers and then spending many thousands of dollars and 2 years of work trying to find a company to market the probe, it now appears the enterprise will be successful. It already is in some ways. I have a patent pending. I own the trademark, Periotest, and I sold the whole project to the Block Drug Company, which now has plans to market the instrument on an international basis. Assuming all goes well and I receive my patent, then I will have substantial royalties. The project is still in a developmental stage, but Block is expecting to have the product marketed sometime before the end of this year. They're very excited also. So, Earl, I just wanted to tell you how valuable your tapes have been, and especially Acres of Diamonds, with that particular phrase, hidden in common everyday garments. Thanks. The letter is signed, Best Personal Regards, Dr. Bernard Lowenthal. Well, it so happened that at the time I received the letter, I was seeing a periodontist for some minor work, and I showed him the letter. He read it with great interest and said he thought the plastic, disposable, color-coded, sterilized probe was a super idea. He went on to say that he would certainly use the probes. And I'm happy to be able to update Dr. Lowenthal's story for you. I'd written to him requesting permission to read his letter on Insight, and when he wrote back on June 20th, he also had some wonderful news to share. Dr. Lowenthal writes, I'm pleased to tell you that I now have obtained the patent. I was just notified. The Acres of Diamonds message in my Lead the Field program, we now have the new Lead the Field program, is about an African farmer who, upon hearing stories of the diamond discoveries in Africa, sold his farm to go look for diamonds. The man who bought his farm later discovered that the farm was covered with diamonds, and according to the story, it became the world-famous Kimberley Diamond Mine, the most productive diamond mine in history. The moral of the story is simply that before we go rushing off looking for greener pastures, if you'll permit me to mix my metaphors, we should creatively give the pasture we're in a thorough going-over. And I pointed out that in every kind of work, without exception, there are wonderful opportunities awaiting discovery. Ray Kroc could have been satisfied to operate that first hamburger stand in suburban Chicago, but he saw the larger opportunity, and the worldwide McDonald's is the result. Then there's the story of Stu Leonard. He's another Insight subscriber, as a matter of fact. Stu Leonard was a milkman with a home delivery route when he saw the opportunity inherent in a food store specializing in dairy products. He now has the largest and most successful retail dairy store in the world in Norwalk, Connecticut. Well, I could go on and on telling the stories of those of us who saw great opportunity lurking in what might seem to others an ordinary job. Now, the same is true, of course, of the work you're now doing. There are ways to improve upon what you do. Nothing is as good as it can be, as it someday will be. But opportunity doesn't wear a little sign saying, hey, look at me, I'm an opportunity. I saw a motion picture on television recently which depicted H.G. Wells, the famous novelist and historian and inventor, inventing a time machine with which he traveled from the turn of the century into our present time. Everywhere he looked, he saw the astonishing improvements that had been made over a 90-year period. There were hotels, sure, but incredible, massive, mind-boggling hotels like the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco. Motor cars were everywhere, but what vastly improved motor cars? Elevators, like rocket ships, moved up and down on the outside of buildings. Everything he had known in his world had evolved into so much more. Well, everything we work with today will evolve into so much more, something so much better. The best book or advertisement has yet to be written. We need to move from a dependency on fossil fuel to a hydrogen economy. How can we do these things? What's going to happen in the world when the pollution gets so bad in Mexico City, it's no longer possible for human beings to live there? It's almost that bad now. We were recently in Athens, Greece. It's the same there. How can we clean it up? And our own choking cities like Los Angeles in the bargain. We need better writing instruments, better cars, better health. There are areas of the world in which heart disease is virtually unknown. They don't even have heart specialists. Why is heart disease the #1 killer in the United States? How can we reduce the incidence of cancer now reaching epidemic proportions in certain areas?
ADA Audio vous présente La totalité des possibilités par Louise Hay. À la narration, Daniel Panton.
The same is true, he says, of adult-onset diabetes and other common degenerative conditions. After a few days or a week or so at his institute, people often throw away their insulin and hypodermic needles. They don't need them anymore. There are men and women in every facet, every labyrinth of human society.
Je suis Louise Hay. C'est un honneur et une véritable joie de m'adresser à vous. Je vais vous parler de la totalité des possibilités. Nous allons donc repousser un peu les frontières de notre esprit. Essayons d'aller plus loin que là où vous étiez quand vous...
As creativity expert Roger Von Eck says, it isn't what we don't know that keeps us from being more creative. It's what we do know. It's our mindset. It's our habitual way of looking at things. It's seeing things as they are instead of as they could be, as they might be. It's seeing that same old empty lot as an empty lot instead of the site of a beautiful new building. I've said it many times that all of us need to set aside a think time, a time when we can quietly doodle on a notepad and question things, when we can ask ourselves, how can I make it better? How can I do a better job of serving our customers? How can everything be rearranged in a better way? What would this be like if it were smaller, larger, a different color? Any person can come up with good ideas that will make things better. I was watching a man the other day. He was in his late 60s and working for a large company. I said to myself, I wonder what he has done to make the world a better place. I wonder how many ideas he's come up with that helped his company do a better job. Or has he just been a rider? Has he simply spent his years sitting in the back of the truck with his legs dangling, going along for the ride? Who knows? Only we can really know, each one of us, how well, how productively we've spent our time during our individual holidays on Earth. There's so much to be done. There's such a great need for the contributions of each one of us. And as the story of Dr. Lowenthal, who invented a better dental instrument, proves, there are opportunities in our daily work. They're there every day, just lying in wait. But remember, they're wearing everyday garments. They don't look like opportunities until you start looking at them in detail and turning your mind loose at the same time. I came across some interesting tips on leadership, and I felt they could be as important in getting along with the members of our families as they are in managing people in business. See what you think of them. Remember that the other person's interests may be different from yours. Respect them always. Know his habits, his likes and dislikes. If his taste differs from yours, remember that you are just as peculiar to him as he is to you. Don't insist on your so-called superior tastes and views. Find a common ground of interest. Share the limelight with subordinates. This inspires loyalty and enthusiasm. Give them credit in front of others for their successes. Stand ready to shoulder the blame for their failures. And privately take the long-term view. Your purpose is to influence others to produce results. Let somebody else do the strutting. Businesses need teams, not just bosses. Be alert to the other person's wishes and preferences in small matters as well as large ones. That little extra makes a deep impression on the other person and wins his confidence and friendship. Let him talk. He will tell you about himself and his problems. As soon as you've discovered what he wants, give as much as you can and explain why you can't give more. Meet once, whenever possible. If the main point is at stake and minor concessions and other devices do not succeed, delay the issue. This gives the other person a chance to reconsider. It gives you a chance to reorganize your campaign, reconsider yourself, perhaps to obtain more facts or to seek someone else's help. Most people hate to yield under pressure, so if you cannot win at the moment, don't lose heart. Time alone has won many battles. Smile and give a hearty greeting and mean it. Don't make an enemy by wounding the other person's vanity. If you do, you've lost a potential friend and possibly made an enemy. A smile costs nothing, but is beyond price. A friendly person is the one who smiles and shows warm human traits along with his merchandise. Cherish the esteem of people with whom you wish to maintain friendly relationships. Protect them from your own desire to feel important. Remember, the desire to feel important is always at work within us. Take great pains to spare others humiliation or embarrassment. Don't throw your weight around. Even if you're right, you may land on your ear. To draw people to you, feel a genuine appreciation of their problems. Let them know about it. Let your employees and associates know that their success and welfare are a matter of personal interest to you, and mean it. Good organization demands a two-way flow of information and understanding. Put the other person in your place, and occasionally put yourself in his. Handle each person differently. Take into account his special interests, the things he does well, his wants, and his capacity to think and do. Well, there you are, some how-tos for leadership. A company's progress and success depend on its management, its leadership, and the same is true for a family. There are a few subjects more important than the study of the art of leadership. You know, as parents, we have no idea as to how far-reaching our influence is on our children. When a child is born to us, we take on an 18-year job, at least an 18-year job, because by that time, let's face it, the kids are pretty well on their own. As a rule, we can begin this job with no background or training whatsoever. We're as unqualified to be parents as it's possible to be. We think of all the mistakes we believe our parents made in raising us, and we resolve not to make the same ones. During the early, vital, and formative years of our youngsters' lives, we're as new at the business as they are. We try our best, we read all the articles, no two of which seem to agree. We learn Dr. Spock by heart, and in the meantime we're fully engaged in trying to succeed ourselves. In those early years of marriage, the husband and wife are knocking themselves out, trying to demonstrate to themselves and to each other, and to their parents and friends and neighbors, that they're competent and up-and-coming members of human society. They find themselves saddled with 100 jobs and responsibilities they never dreamed their parents had to cope with, but which they did cope, and usually successfully. They have their work, their social life, their friends, their life together. And in addition, they have this here kid, this strange, irresponsible, helpless, unintelligible, noisy lump of humankind that they're somehow responsible for shaping into a productive member of the human race. Thinking back, they realized that in all the years they went to school, there was not a single subject that dealt with raising a child into successful adulthood. They know they're supposed to be model parents. They also know that they're supposed to pay the rent or the mortgage payment. There's the car and the insurance and the furniture and the clothing and the medical and dental bills. In the early years of their marriage, there are so many things they're supposed to do well, and they hope they can get just one good night's sleep with that little stranger in the house who outgrows his clothes as fast as they can buy them and gets them dirtier even faster. And in the meantime, every time they open a magazine or a newspaper, they're admonished about the perils of parenthood. Everybody they know has a different theory on child raising or toilet training, and everybody they know is as confused as they are, and as their parents were when they were babies, and their parents before them, and all parents going back to the days when the human brain wasn't developed enough to make a problem out of it at all. And so what do? They do their best, just as their parents did. They try to make a success of their own lives, as additional children come along perhaps, and one day all the kids are grown. And if during the long intervening years they've managed to keep what they had when they first decided to get married and they still love and like each other, they realize they've been quite successful. They've done a good job, and they set a good example. Nothing worthwhile comes easy. Marriage, living, child raising, working, succeeding. But if we're conscientious and do our best, one day at a time, it's sort of amazing how well it turns out. And now, it's their turn. And heaven help them. Someone passed on to me an article written some time back by Ardis Whitman. It's titled, "What Do You Mean Normal?" And in this article, I think Miss Whitman makes a very important distinction, and that is that if we're to be the best we can, normal must not mean average. For example, it is in the normal nature of things that no two human beings on Earth are exactly alike. So the word normal should not be confused with the word average. If you leave your fingerprints on something, you might just as well leave your name and address. No other human being on the face of the earth has the same prints. You hear music and see a sunset differently from any other person. You might enjoy a book that would bore your wife or husband. You might like lots of people around, and your spouse might like it a lot better when there's just the two of you. When you say, I want my child to be normal, you don't mean average, and you shouldn't. What you do mean is that you want your child to grow up as a distinct individual, a part of society to be sure, but with his or her own abilities, talents, likes, and dislikes. So to be normal is not to be average, it's to be different. We may think we know everything about our friends and neighbors, but we don't. We don't even know ourselves that well. How can we expect to know others? The smiling small talk and the sharing of small intimacies with our good friends does not reveal our true selves, nor does it reveal theirs. We present one face to the world as a rule, and another one to ourselves. There must be millions of people who feel inadequate just because they're not like what they think they see around them, and half the people they see and talk to feel the same way. They're not inadequate at all. It's just that they've never really understood themselves enough to realize that we're not supposed to be like anyone else, because no one is. We're supposed to be ourselves and realize that we're distinct individuals. As Artis Whitman points out, what's normal? Take a look at the great ones. Socrates one day stood for hours in the snow, oblivious to wind and cold, working out a timeless problem in philosophy. Churchill calmly walked into the bedroom of a president of the United States with only a towel draped around him. Einstein apparently could go a whole lifetime without giving a thought to whether or not he needed a haircut. Are these people normal or abnormal? They're normal. That's the way they do things, and that's normal for them. I'm sure there are lots of people who are keeping themselves from something worthwhile they'd like to be doing just because they think they're being normal not to do it, because none of their friends or acquaintances is doing it. The truth of the matter is that they would be normal to follow their own natural inclinations, since no two people are alike, and they're being abnormal in copying their friends. If you try to conform to the crowd, you're not conforming at all, really. You're making a mistake. You're trying to act like people act on the surface. It isn't you, and if you really knew the people, you'd find that what you thought they were like might be a far cry from what they're really like. What's normal for you, for me, is not easily discovered. It's not a question of being adjusted, being average. It's not found by looking around at other people. It's found only by inward searching, by the knowledge of who I am, not by the knowledge of what my neighbor does. Each of us is outstanding in some way. Every person on earth has a strong point, an inclination, a talent, even hidden genius for something. Being normal is finding it out and enjoying it. And when we find it, life takes on new meaning and excitement. And when we develop this ability, our friends will frequently say that we're different from the general run of people. Of course we're different from the general run of people, and so is every individual in the general run of people if he or she only knew it. Sometimes you'll hear someone say when he looks at someone else, I wish I were like him. Balderdash. You're just looking at that other person's strong points. You have something he doesn't have. Find out what it is and develop along the lines you were intended to develop. When you've done this, a lot of other people will wish they were like you, but they shouldn't. Being normal is being what we are as individuals. It's a fact that each of us is a mystery and a miracle. What a shame it is to try to paint over the miraculous mystery of ourselves a likeness of someone else. To be normal is to be ourselves and never average. The study of English is probably hated by more children than any other subject. They find it tedious and boring. They feel that they already know how to get along with their language and see no reason to delve into the origins and intricacies of proper English usage. So they slip by. Since most of the other kids hate English too, it's almost like belonging to a kind of club. In an item in American Educator magazine, Van Agemian wrote that in today's world, poor spelling, grammar, punctuation, syntax, and vocabulary have seen the floodgates opened, and we are now drowning in the waters of confusion. There is so much change being legitimized in our language that it's a wonder why English is being taught at all in school. Take, for example, the comma. Agemian went on to say the comma should be the pause that refreshes. Commas also create useful nuances in the language. The more nuances, the more shades of meaning. The more shades of meaning, the richer the language. In refusing to use the comma, we are impoverishing English. And cultural anthropologists argue that limiting language can limit one's scope of thought. I believe that. Hardly a day passes that I don't see misuse of the apostrophe. The apostrophe is used for contractions and to show possession. But the most common mistake, and we hear this most often on local news programs, no, we simply hear it everywhere today, is the one that mixes the singular with the plural, as in, if someone commits a crime, they are going to pay for it. Someone, of course, is singular. The word they is plural. It should be, if people commit crimes, they are going to pay for them, or if someone commits a crime, he or she is going to pay for it. But the word they does not mean or take the place of he or she. They does not mean both sexes, which is the way it's often intended. We don't have a word in English that denotes both sexes, although he is often used in that sense, unless the audience is entirely women. The use of gonna and gotta instead of I'm going to and I've got to or I have to is sloppy and an ugly use of a beautiful language. The other evening I heard a TV newscaster on a local station who was reporting a story about dairy cattle say Holstein heifer instead of Holstein heifer. That's just sloppy work. Newscasters especially should keep a dictionary handy. A heifer is a cow that has not produced a calf and is under 3 years old. Everyone is going to make a mistake occasionally. Over the years I've made many egregious blunders. English is a large language, and the rules can be complicated occasionally. But perhaps if we all try a little harder, we could do a lot better. Our use of our language, more than anything else, broadcasts the extent of our education. I remember a time when I wanted to cross Michigan Avenue in Chicago while a parade was passing by. The crowds lined both sides of the avenue to a depth of perhaps 10 or 12 people. Parents were holding the little ones up for a better view, and they were jammed in like sardines. I had to cross the street, so I just started. I found that a crowd is made up of individuals, and all you have to do is get by one at a time. I was soon across the street and on my way. It hadn't been easy, but it hadn't been too difficult either, and had taken far less time than you might imagine. It reminded me of the old story about the railroad engineer who started out from Chicago to California. If he waited until all the lights turned green along the entire route, he'd stay in the terminal for the rest of his life. He just took one light at a time. When it was time to start, the first light flashed green, and away he went, and one by one the green lights came on all across the country, and the red ones were turning on behind him. It frequently happens that we fail to begin a big job because of the massive obstacles, real and imaginary, we see in our way. But like crossing the street through a crowd or taking a train across the country, we'll find that by just taking the obstacles and problems one at a time, it isn't too long before we find ourselves with the task successfully accomplished. If two young people in love could see in a sudden flash all the problems and disappointments they'll have to face during their life together, they might decide to forget the whole thing. Fortunately, the problems are hidden from view. If a housewife could see all the meals she must cook, all the dishes she must wash, and all the rooms she must clean during her married life, she'd probably join some contemplative society and spend the rest of her life sitting down. It's the same with anything. Years ago, if I could have seen all the radio shows I would have to research, write, and broadcast for my Our Changing World program, I might have become a beachcomber. But by taking things as they come, one at a time, we manage to do just fine most of the time. We get into hot water only when we fall behind, when we let one unfinished task pile on another until they form a mountain too large to tackle. Then we can't keep up with the new ones. This is the best argument I know of for doing each day those things we should do, and for doing each day something on which we're working. This is how books are read, bridges are built, children are raised, jobs are finished, and a life is successfully lived. Don't concern yourself with tomorrow's problems today. Leave them for tomorrow. Concern yourself with those things you know you should be doing right now, today. Do them as best you can, and your day will be lived successfully. Put enough successful days together, and you have a successful lifetime. I would nearly go out of my mind when I had to drive in heavy traffic, but I've learned to keep cool with the realization that I'll get to my destination eventually in good time, and all the stewing and sweating and cussing in the world isn't going to improve the situation. You just have to take 1 mile at a time. Someone once wrote something to the effect that nothing in the world will take the place of persistence. I believe it completely. Once you know where you're going, just stay with it. One problem, one success, one day at a time.